Hello out there, everyone on the internet. Thank you for joining us today for this HXA webinar on improving viewpoint diversity in higher ed, where we will be discussing possibility that some sort of system of checks and balances in our universities and colleges might be the answer, or at least part of the answer. So let me just say a few things about what the function of these sorts of virtual events are. They are an opportunity for our HXA members to get a sense of like what the cutting edge of discussions are when it comes to open inquiry in higher education. And because this is an HXA event, we really do try to do things the HXA way. And so let me just remind those of you who maybe have forgotten, or those of you who aren't familiar with the HXA, just what that is, right? We try to adhere to these 5 pillars of behavior. So make your case with evidence, be intellectually charitable, be intellectually humble, be constructive, and be yourself. Share your genuine and sincere thoughts. We want to encourage you to please follow the HXA way in the chat, in the questions that you pose, so that this could be a really productive and constructive experience for all of us involved. A matter of procedure, right? So, of course, in Zoom, you've got your chat box, but you also have, for webinars, this separate Q&A box or Q&A function. So as you have questions come to you that you want to ask participants, not participants, but presenters in the webinar, just go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box, not in the chat box, but in the Q&A box. And if there are certain questions that you see other people asking that really tickle your fancy, then go ahead and upvote those. And as we go through the webinar, as questions roll in and as they're germane to the discussion, we'll pose them to our presenters, to our panelists. So before we get started, a few other things. I want to encourage you to subscribe to our weekly emails, especially our newsletter. So you got a QR code there on the screen. You want to whip the phone out and take a quick picture of it. Also, go ahead and subscribe to our special Substack, Free the Inquiry, where you can find cutting edge news and opinions from HXA staff on what's happening with respect to open inquiry in higher education. And then finally, if you are not a member of HXA, you should fix that. You should become a member. We could really use your membership. We're really eager to grow our membership and to get more people on board who can help us elevate the university from within. If you're not a member, it's free, doesn't cost anything. And finally, I mean, this is just going to be so much fun. From June 23rd to the 25th in New York City, right in the shadow of the Brooklyn Bridge, we will be having our annual HXA conference. If you haven't registered, registration is open. Go ahead and snap a picture of that QR code, sign up, come hang out with a whole bunch of passionate people who really want to advance the cause of open inquiry in higher education. And it's going to be a blast. I mean, summertime in New York City, it's just so much fun. So with that, we're going to go ahead. I'm going to introduce our distinguished panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Professor Jacob Mackey, who is Associate Professor of Classics at Occidental College in Los Angeles, where he, among other things, does research on ancient Roman religion. He's also done some really interesting work in cultural evolutionary psychology. Our second panelist is Dr. Michael Jindra, who's a visiting researcher at Boston University. He's an anthropologist by training and has done a lot of work on anthropology of religion, but has also done some work on inequality. And then our third panelist is Professor Lawrence Eppard, who is an associate professor of sociology at Shippensburg University in the Cumberland Valley in central Pennsylvania, who has also done some work on inequality. And he is the director of, remind me of the center you're the director of.
The Connors Institute here at Shippensburg University.
Excellent. So with that, gentlemen, I just want to first ask you, we're the sort of the occasion for this webinar is the publication of an op-ed that the three of you, along with Fabio Rojas, sociologist at Indiana University, published in the Chronicle of Higher Education recently about how checks and balances in university governance structures might help increase viewpoint diversity among faculty. So I'd love to have you kind of outline your general art. Well, what's the problem you're addressing, and how do you think, and what's the solution you outline in the op-ed?
I can go first, I guess. The problem, yeah, I mean, just a real one-sidedness in departments in universities and lack of trust. And that's been well covered by a lot of articles, a lot of people, political groupthink. There's just not been enough viewpoint diversity in a lot of universities and in specific departments. And so we're trying to figure out a way to do that within university structures instead of having, and in some ways we've been a little bit superseded by events. We started writing this article last November before the Trump administration even began. It's after the election, though, I think. But now, of course, we see a lot of this coming from outside of universities. What we've tried to do is set up a model where universities can kind of self-correct within their structure. So the checks and balances involve trustees, faculty, administrators, accrediting agencies, and then outside review boards and that may come in. So 4 or 5 different organizations that would then kind of have this as a goal of viewpoint diversity to avoid some of the problems that we see in academia with ideological imbalance. Jacob, Lawrence, either of you can add more to that.
I can go. There's a couple of problems with the current imbalance, the ideological imbalance we have in institutions of higher ed. One of them is that it distorts the production of knowledge. It distorts research when everyone is on the same page ideologically, and they have no one really to push back on them, either in the institution or in gatekeeping rules such as peer review. And so that's a problem for the production of knowledge. And there's another problem with ideological imbalance in higher ed, and that is a problem of, you might say, like legitimacy. So the public is not stupid. The public can see what's going on in colleges and universities, and they can see, broad swaths of the public can see that their perspectives, their priorities are not being represented in these institutions. And so it's no surprise when the public sees that their interests, perspectives, priorities are not represented. It's no surprise if they then vote for candidates for office who promise to pull funding, promise to make reforms. And so we hoped in our article to inspire a process of internal reform within these institutions that could mitigate some of that externally imposed reform.
Yeah, it's I mean, I can't speak for Mike, but I can speak for Jake and myself that we've noticed this problem for years. And it can seem like we are being opportunists and trying to take advantage of the current political moment. But when I first began teaching, I graduated in 2013 as a sociologist. And when you're first teaching, you want to kind of teach the things you learned in grad school. And so I was putting together lectures for a variety of sociology courses. And as I would put together these lectures and try to update a lot of the data and information that I had been taught in grad school, I kept noticing a misalignment, that some of the things that have been claimed in some of these books about a variety of topics, scholars had taken some liberties. They had twisted the facts a bit. They had massaged the data. And at first, it just seemed like a few rogue outliers. And then I started noticing it more and more. And then other people started noticing it. And the field of psychology had a replication crisis. And the problem became too big to ignore. I was seeing it everywhere. And this has been, since 2013 that I've been noticing this problem. And Jake and I started looking around, well, why is this a problem? Why are we having such distortions in the classroom and in our scholarship and then in the public discourse, because the media picks this up and they run with it. And yeah, I think the imbalance is pretty significant. I think UCLA, they find that it's like 5-1 liberal to conservative. Other studies, I think Mitchell Langberg has found that it's more like 9-1. And in some fields, I mean, it's completely out of whack, 42-1, 27-1, et cetera. So this has been a long time coming for all of us. All of us have talked extensively about this for years. And Just now we're seeing politicians coming in with a hammer and attempting to break the university in a completely inappropriate way in the opposite direction. And if we had just handled business ourselves, maybe it wouldn't have happened. So that's my perspective on this.
So you've kind of characterized your first approximation, at least, what you think the problem of viewpoint diversity is on campus. I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about what you mean by checks and balances, and how adopting the proposal that you put in the op-ed would alter uh, university governing structures as we see them now, and what particular processes within those governing structures would see some change.
Either of you guys want to go first, go ahead.
Well, I was going to give it to you, Mike. Mike's actually first author. I was listed as first author, but we can talk about it. I mean, we do all outline in broad strokes. These are basically suggestions for the conversation, right? To get the conversation started, which we didn't start, of course, but here are some areas we think there are some deficiencies. Here's some possible channels that we might go through to try to address them, but we don't have anything firmly or concretely. We do think that, and Jake, you can help me out here, but we do think that, and we said this in the article, senior administrators, trustees, provosts, people that have traditionally had a seat at the table, they just haven't really asserted that role in the hiring process, in taking a second look at advertisements that are really narrow and intentionally so to fit some sort of ideological direction of a department. University presidents knowing that certain hires would only further an ideological direction in a department and just rubber stamping the hire anyway. I think there's a lot that exists in current university structures that could start to turn the ship around a bit here. I don't think it's enough, but there is a role. We talk about shared governance, and I think that a lot of senior administrators and trustees have kind of abdicated and rubber stamped a lot of what faculty have been doing. So I think it's kind of clawing back some of that rather than creating a whole new role for university administrators. Jake, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Alex very helpfully reminded us before we started this conversation of the American Association of University Professors, the AAUP's 1966, 1967 statement on the government of colleges and universities, where they say that, I'll read, the building of a strong faculty requires careful joint effort in such actions as staff selection and promotion and the granting of tenure. And so we want to take really seriously the joint in that joint effort, and we want to invite other stakeholders in the university to really assert their role more strongly.
Yeah, I mean, I just those are all great points. I mean, I first thought of this checks and balances model. I mean, I think it started to come up in the national conversation, and I just said to myself, why don't we adopt that within the university? We've got these ideological bubbles. We've got major problems. How would that work? And I just thought of the various actors and I said, look, we need to involve more people. We need to involve more groups, and especially the trustees. And that's maybe a little more controversial. We don't want them micromanaging what's going on in the department with every specific hire, but they have overall responsibility for the quality of their universities. And if there's a problem with that, they should be taking action along with the other parties to try to correct the situation. And so we tried to, we all wrote about this article, we tried to think about the best way to put this and how to balance these various parties and do it in the best way.
Yeah, and we are extremely sympathetic to outside actors coming in bad faith and attempting to distort the university in the opposite direction. I guess a lot of the responses that I've gotten in my email box from people have been sort of in that vein, this idea that, well, they're going to come in and they're going to try to assert, politics or, leverage some power in order to fulfill their individual desires or really distort the program just in a different direction. And my response to that is, number one, many departments are already extremely ideological and carrying out politics in the manner in which they are hiring people and writing job ads. So it's already political, number one. And number two, if we decide just to double down and to hunker down and to try to resist all efforts to reform this process, it is going to be done by outside actors. We're seeing that right now. And that's not what we want. We actually see this as a way to stop the inappropriate manipulation of the university. So I get it. I don't want to trample on academic freedom. I don't want administrators hiring people who are not competent, hiring people simply for politics. But I think we should be honest that in a lot of ways, we do that now in a lot of departments, certainly in sociology programs.
So let me try to steel man, and I do want to come back to this point about what kind of response you've gotten. But before we do that, I want to kind of steel man one kind of response to your proposal. So you've got a math department, for example, and they're getting together, and they've, the faculty and the math department have jointly decided, and they've come to some consensus that, we want to hire someone who specializes in algebraic topology, or, pick something really abstruse and abstract. And so they go through, they hire a bunch of, or they review a bunch of applicant files, and they forward an applicant to the provost or whatever the administrator is who's responsible for kind of making the final okay. I guess one of the challenges of kind of involving these other non-faculty, non-expert stakeholders is, how is a provost, or how is a trustee, or how is a university president in any position at all to evaluate the application file of someone for like highly specialized, highly technical, or even non-technical? Not I mean, if you're hiring someone in like who specializes in European history. I mean, isn't it just kind of silly to ask people that have no relevant expertise to be part of the discussion in the first place? Doesn't that just introduce a whole lot more noise into the process?
Jake, you're shaking your, go ahead. You got, I think you got something to say there.
Well, no, I agree. The steel manning is very effective, and it's absolutely right that I mean, the whole reason you hire professors and give them tenure is because, they are the subject matter experts. They're the ones you hired because you are not a subject matter expert. And so the idea that then, a president who, has absolutely knows nothing about math would come in and tell the math experts how to hire a math expert is problematic. But, this is a space where, we suggested that there are other avenues. Like, it doesn't just have to be a provost or a president saying, nah, I think you should actually be hiring a mathematician who does this other thing. You could have, there's already outside organizations like accrediting bodies. You could form committees of people with a broad range of expertise who could help, assist departments in locating where their areas of imbalance may be. And that may just be disciplinary imbalance. Maybe there's too many topologists, and there needs to be someone doing some other area of math, or it could be ideological, sort of partisanship kind of imbalance. So you could assemble, either working groups for this kind of thing. You could bring in existing committees and organizations. There's more than one way to skin that cat,
I mean, I think this is really more relevant for social sciences and humanities departments, because that's where the problem has been. And so I wouldn't see any kind of overarching interventions or anything in all the departments. I think you, first of all, have to figure out where you're having these problems. And it's not even going to be in every department, in every social science or in every humanities departments. I think in some departments and some universities, it's worse than in others. And so I think there's a process there where you just evaluate, okay, do we have a problem or not? And then what do we do about it?
Yeah,
And
one of the so I mean the fear among faculty is that administrators are going to put their thumb on the scale in the opposite direction. I think our point is, number one, they have really, in many places, abdicated their responsibility completely, and they're really kind of rubber stamping. So clawing back a little bit of authority doesn't mean taking a disproportionate amount of authority, number one. And number two, at least as it stands right now, and maybe this will change in the future, and it could certainly be different regionally and at different types of institutions, but as far as we know, surveys suggest administrators are not different from the faculty in their viewpoints. I mean, if anything, administrators are more imbalanced. So this idea that clawing back a little bit of authority in places where they've completely abdicated it is going to completely reverse the directions of departments. I don't think that's a reality on the ground right now, writ large. Now, again, it could be different regionally, it could be different in certain types of institutions.
So let's actually, I want to press on this point you just made, Lawrence, because it's germane to some of the questions we've gotten here in the chat. So we have one person's talking about the administration at her alma mater, or this person's alma mater, being from top to bottom a monolith, and trying to get this particular institution to reform is like screaming into the void. So the administration, the potential checking authority and balancing authority doesn't really seem to be at all properly disposed to check or balance ideological homogeneity among the faculty. So I guess the blunt way to put this question is, doesn't your proposal for reform require the world to be other than it in fact is? It actually requires there to be more viewpoint diversity among the potentially checking and balancing authorities that you've invoked in your op-ed.
I have a thought. Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, when I was thinking of this originally, I'm thinking, we do have a lot of problems in a lot of universities, and in reality, I think it's often going to have to come from the trustees. They're going to have to hire a president who's on board with this. You've got to get people who see that there's a problem and are on board with this kind of process. So if trustees hire a president that's on board with it, and then the president hires a provost, it kind of filters down that way. If you have a faculty that's reluctant to get involved or to change anything like this. So I see that that's happening. I think trustees, tend to be responsible to a wider audience, whether it's a state university or a private university. It seems to me there's more ideological balance there. Maybe people can dispute that, and from that process, filtering down is what I'm thinking how it might actually work in reality.
Yeah, I mean, the point is a valid one. We've proposed a bunch of checks and balances, but if every single layer of this system has the same exact viewpoints and same ideological blind spots, then it's going to be a mistake that's passed on to each layer and not be corrected. So I do see that we have some other ideas which we can talk about in a moment, but Jake, you had a point you wanted to make.
Well, yeah, it's the way we came to this pass, I think, was there was a lot of sort of a sort of almost mindless, unconscious process of sort of people hiring people whose work they liked, and it just so happened that the work they liked happened to have a particular ideological bent. But I'm actually kind of I have a certain amount of confidence in faculty and even administrators that if you sat down with them and just got really explicit about this, said, "Hey, everyone, let's just look at the sort of figures. Let's look at how much ideological imbalance there is." And couldn't we all agree that a certain amount of diversity of viewpoint would be good for all of us? I actually think you could get a lot of people, if you became really explicit about this, I think you could get a lot of people on the same page with you. So I do think there's actually some hope within the faculty and the administration, even if everyone is skewed in their personal political leanings and ideological perspectives in one direction. I do think that if we just sort of started having these conversations on our campuses within our departments, you could get people to say, yes, look, I am a Marxist, but I recognize that it would be important to have someone representing, a Hayekian kind of view or, a neoliberal view, I think having the conversation and talking about it and being explicit about it and explicit about what we're doing is the first step. I have a lot of confidence there.
So Mike's point about buy-in from the top down, I mean, that is crucial. So Jake and I have had some conversations about this very problem, which is, okay, specifically, what would the guardrails be? Specifically, what would the checks and balances be? One of the ideas we have been sort of passing back and forth is the idea of creating places like Connors Institute at Shippensburg University or the Hamilton Center at University of Florida, spaces that are specifically designed to be heterodox, that have some faculty lines where a humanities professor is going to offer some heterodox, courses along with the traditional courses, and the administration could make sure that that's represented in gen ed and that students could take that, and it could be kind of a marketplace of ideas. You could take the humanities courses that are more heterodox or not. But to Mike's point, and I'm not really sure how to get around this, and I think I saw a Konstantinos or somebody in the chat. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. But if you don't have buy-in at the top, then that center just becomes another place where that carries out the ideological project. The president doesn't agree with a new president comes in and the center exists, right? They put a director in place who doesn't want heterodox viewpoints, and that just becomes a reproduction of the same blind spots that occur across the university. So I'm not really sure. Dino, for sure. Yeah. I'm not really sure without buying at the top how this works. That's a good point, Mike.
So real quick, again, it looks like the chat box is very active and very lively, which is great. But if you have got questions that you want answered, you make sure you put them in the Q&A box, because that's what's actually being
Sorry, I
actively
jumped
monitored.
the gun.
No,
Sorry.
no, that's just fine. That's just fine. So I actually kind of wanted to raise a point here that might be germane, and it's germane to the sort of the Steelman attempt that I made a few minutes ago, the complaint about expertise. Take another example. You've got a history department, and the department is, say, for the sorts of reasons that Jacob is alluding to, they just tended to sort of hire people that are already kind of in line with their particular research interests, their particular approaches. To say it's like it's a history department that's dominated by people who are interested in environmental history, history of the civil rights movement, and so on. And they're having this debate and about what they want to hire in for this new faculty line that the administration is giving them. And they decide, we want to hire a historian of like the women's rights movement, 19th century women's rights movements. So they go to the provost and they say, hey, we want to do this. The provost says, no, you're not. No, you've already got a big cluster of people doing that sort of thing. We don't want you to hire another person like that. What we want you to do is we want you to hire a military historian. And the point I'd like to just sort of introduce in the discussion is it's not clear that in making that decision, the provost has violated any kind of canon of expertise, right? Because it's not clear that it's actually even a matter of expertise whether or not you should hire a women's rights historian or a military historian. It just seems like here are two different paths you can choose, and there might be reasonable ways of making those sorts of decisions about which way to go, but it's not like historians have some special advantage in making those sorts of judgments. So I guess maybe one other place where checks and balances might be relevant is when certain research interests come to dominate certain fields of studies to the exclusion of other also very legitimate research interests within a given discipline. So I would say that like in social sciences, there is a tendency to really want to hire people whose approach to studying society is heavily weighted towards examining structural factors as opposed to what you might call kind of agentic factors, right? Patterns in the ways people choose and structure their environments and things like that. So I don't know, what do you guys think about that as like, one place to get input is actually just, there might be different centers of power within the university might have different preferences for the sorts of research interests they want to see represented on the faculty. And it doesn't seem clear to me, at least, that debates about those preferences can be settled just by appeal to expert authority.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think, provosts and presidents and deans deny requests for lines all the time for all sorts of reasons, right? And so, why not? Why not have them jump in like that? And I actually think, as you were talking, it made me think one thing we haven't really brought up, and we didn't bring it up in our article, is there's another stakeholder group that we haven't talked about, and that's students. And I know from my own experience with my students at my college that students really, it's not lost on them that everyone is sort of pushing a similar agenda in many of the humanities and social science programs. And I think the student experience, an argument could be made from student experience that there's a need for greater diversity. And that's something that a chancellor, a president, a dean could appeal to when they make that kind of intervention in a departmental, hiring process decision, right?
This is a stumbling block I think we need to address, and maybe we keep talking about it, but you bring up a great point, Alex, which is, and this is something that I've been mulling over, and I haven't been able to really formulate a coherent response, but somebody has to decide that there is a hole or a weakness or a void somewhere in the offerings in the university. And it's not clear to me that a provost who may have risen themselves from the history department or the math department or whatever, with their very narrow area of expertise, is going to be able to do a really legitimate assessment of that. I don't know how to solve this problem. I think if it's very obvious that we've hired 10 critical race theorists, or we've hired this many in this direction, if it's very obvious to people who have a very rudimentary grasp of a field, then it should be pretty easy for them to get involved and say, hey, you really should massage this advertisement to make it less narrow and make room for more a wider variety of candidates. But on some of these questions, I mean, how expert are they in evolutionary psychology or any number of fields to make this kind of an assessment? I don't know how to answer that question. I think it's a legitimate stumbling block that we didn't address in the short period, in the short space we had in that op-ed, but that would need to be addressed in order for this to work.
Can I add on
Yeah, go
here?
ahead. Yeah.
Well, so one thing, Lawrence and I actually were talking a while ago about this very issue, and one thing we came up with is, because of the sort of knowledge, the knowledge deficiencies of the various actors in this in these institutions, what if there was an organization like Heterodox Academy, maybe, that had a kind of consulting arm, and that when, say, a provost or a president, or maybe a board of trustees, or maybe a department, the chair of the department could reach out and say, hey, can you help us figure out how to increase viewpoint diversity at our institution for the sake of the student experience, for the sake of diversifying the research portfolio, for this, for the sake of broadening our teaching. What if there was some kind of organization that could draw upon the collective wisdom of its members and create some kind of consulting organization to help out in precisely these circumstances?
Let me just add quickly too. I think there's a distinction between disciplinary specializations. Departments can focus to choose and to be good in certain areas like military history or women's studies or whatever. And I would say a theoretical approach is where you get the key ideological differences. As you mentioned, Alex, structural approaches versus more agent or more cultural oriented approaches. I mean, that's a real interesting indicator. And I think there's enough commonalities in theoretical approach across certainly the social sciences and going into the humanities, that a lot of people are familiar with the ideological range of, say, Marxian approaches versus free market neoliberal approaches or whatever. And so you get a committee. I see this kind of working on a committee level. You get enough heads together and people can kind of sort through some of these issues, but it's not always going to be easy necessarily.
So I want to, there are a couple of people who've asked questions pertaining to, I mean, they really are questions about that involve the current political situation. In your op-ed, there was a line in there about some kind of reform along the lines of inducing greater checks and balances in university governance. might be necessary, just given the extreme political pressure that institutions of higher education are under. And we have some questioners who actually wonder, like, well, so what? Who cares? Maybe actually, and maybe for reasons that have already sort of come up on this during this discussion, the administrators are all, let's just grant for the sake of argument that the administrators are all more or less aligned in terms of viewpoint. The faculty are all aligned in terms of viewpoint. It ain't going to happen because they're all aligned in terms of viewpoint. You need the external pressure, but nonetheless, the three of you seem very cagey about that. I'd love to hear you guys talk a little bit more about why you're so cagey.
By external pressure, you mean totally outside the university, not legislators and government officials? Is that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, well, so one question here says, I'm thinking of state legislatures such as North Carolina, so this is one kind of, I guess, external pressure, creating new centers that are more ideologically balanced and then this is where they're applying pressure. They're moving funds or they're allocating funds for the running of these new sort of, so North Carolina, there's the School of Civic Life or something, I think, is this new essentially academic department that's been stood up. And that's a way of kind of applying pressure to North Carolina, to the University of North Carolina, to like increase viewpoint diversity. That'd be one kind of pressure. I mean, we are seeing other kinds of pressure too, like the federal government withholding research funds or making research funds contingent upon universities doing certain sorts of things. So Columbia, the Trump administration seems to have mandated that Columbia has to restructure its Middle Eastern Studies department as a condition of unlocking federal funds again. So, I mean, that's a whole range of kinds of external pressure, but I'd like
one reason why I really am worried about that is it can totally reverse the other way, right? I mean, there could be a new administration in 4 years. We could have and there's a good possibility the pendulum swings politically. We're going to see a swing back probably. A future administration could go way in the other direction by hammering their own point of view. I just don't think it's a good precedent. I wish universities themselves would recognize the problem and do something about it.
Yeah, when I think of my own discipline of sociology, if we're trying to address a problem with our research, and ultimately we want that to come to some sort of social policy that addresses some social problem. When I see a topic where we have distorted and massaged data, oftentimes there are some center of the road or center right ideas that we're missing that really could have helped balance out and made that a much more objective and much more rigorous study. That doesn't mean 50-50. It doesn't mean that, each study needs to be ideologically completely balanced and those sorts of things. And so the reason why I want to do it from inside of the academy is because I can see where sociology is missing these viewpoints without just doing some sort of, ham-handed kind of, let's come in and just get 50-50, or let's come in and just make sure some Republicans. I don't want Republicans in the sociology department. I don't want them not in the sociology department. I want my department to be seeking truth honestly and objectively. And the only way to do that is to get viewpoints that are missing and that are ignored and that are purposefully avoided and resisted into the department. The only way we can strike the correct balance, I think, is for us to do it, not for DeSantis to do it. He's just doing it for brute, raw politics. He wants Republicans in the university. I don't care. I don't actually care about the politics of the professors. It's really kind of a crass way for me to say, by not having these people, I'm not getting these perspectives, right? So it's just a proxy measure for that. I don't know, Jake, you seem like you wanted to chime in there.
Well, still on the question of sort of caginess about external, maybe governmental interference. Is that what we're, still talking about? I mean,
yeah,
I'm actually not that cagey about the federal government breaking down on actual law breaking, and so there's lots of institutions that just flout anti-discrimination laws in hiring and in admissions. There's lots of institutions that have just public institutions flouted the First Amendment by compelling speech in some way on campus. There's lots of sort of laws related to tax exempt and nonprofit status that have been lots of laws around that have been, flouted because of universities, colleges pursuing partisan activities. So where there are clear violations of the laws in a very objective, surgical way, I think there's a real role for the government to step in and push some external reforms. And I think that pressure then would have a kind of wake up effect on people in these institutions. But it seems to me that maybe what the Trump administration is doing is much more sort of hurling sort of nuclear weapons at universities, and this sort of more scattershot approach. We're going to yank $400 million of funding, Um, so yeah,
Yeah, and
rather than going after
actually,
the specific law breaking. Yeah.
I don't dislike the idea of legislatures saying we would like to have a center or an institute that's multidisciplinary
Yeah.
and that is heterodox. And in fact, that might be a place, since presidents and trustees and provosts, I mean, forget trustees, but provosts and presidents may have their own narrow areas of expertise and they can't really monitor these things. Maybe that's the space where you do it. Maybe you do devote, you say, we're going to have a humanities line at this center. We're going to have, whatever, social science line, education line, whatever. And these are places where we're going to ensure that there are classes that are offered that are heterodox. And in this way, we'll leave the departments alone. They can continue doing the things that they do. And if they like one area of history, fine. We can counter that in sort of a marketplace of ideas in the university by ensuring that there are going to be some alternative classes offered. And again, not classes that teach flat Earth, not classes that teach that there's no racism or things like that, but that offer legitimate perspectives that are missing in the university. You could carve out that space, and then you're not really getting involved with the department's hiring processes. You're creating balance by having this other area of the university that teaches the same types of classes, but you're not
Yeah,
interfering with the departments themselves.
absolutely. Yeah, there's so I was outlining some sort of, if you want to put it this way, negative interventions where the state governments, federal government can get involved when they see law breaking. But what Lawrence is outlining is positive interventions. And there's no reason why a state legislature shouldn't say, hey, we're going to fund a big institute at this university. It's not going to infringe on anyone's academic freedom. We're not firing anyone. We're not telling them what to do, but we're just going to, and this new center is going to promote, civic education. It's going to promote the study of America's founding, ideals and history. It's going to do military history.
Yeah, I would
Both
just,
positive and negative intervention.
yeah, I would just caution, against that is, and I know that's not what you're saying, that to be kind of the main way we do this is through the centers, because I'm concerned about the general ed curriculum. DeSantis yanked all sociology courses in Florida. That shouldn't happen. If sociology departments themselves were more balanced, maybe he wouldn't have done something like that. So the gen ed curriculum and what all students have to go through is important, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So we got a question here. So isn't there a danger in thinking that we can end political bias in academia by having higher authorities impose political bias in the other direction? So, putting a thumb on the other side of the scale with preferences for, say, conservatives. Doesn't that undermine the whole goal of hiring based on merit rather than politics?
I mean, I can field that just because I had addressed that somewhat in my previous answer. Absolutely. And I don't, and a lot of these are really crude measures. I'm saying certain perspectives are missing in sociology that a liberal could present, right? So Lawrence Eppard, am left of center politically, and in my teaching and in my research, I try to present perspectives that I believe are missing in my field. So I don't think we need more Republicans. I don't necessarily care about the political identification of faculty. That was a really crude way for us to think that you could ensure that perspectives that were missing were going to be present because these particular party IDs were going to carry those perspectives. Absolutely, I don't want this to be a numbers game about politics. And to be honest, if the universities were 5-1 liberal to conservative, but sociology had such high standards of entry into the field, And we were so strong methodologically that we didn't let our politics interfere with our research. The 5-to-1, well, in sociology, it's more like 27-to-1 or something like that. But that wouldn't be a problem because it's the perspectives that I care about, not necessarily the party ID. So there's lots of ways to fix this. I could fix sociology and then I wouldn't be concerned with what we're doing within our departments because sociology would have really high standards, would be using advanced quantitative methods. And yeah, so I completely agree. This is that I don't want some sort of crude just accounting of political idea of professors. That's a really terrible way to do this. And I don't have great answers for how to do it, but things like a center or provosts and trustees and presidents taking more of a role. Maybe committees. My problem with the committee is at places like where I work at Shippensburg at a regional university, we wait until the elite institutions hire in the fall. We advertise in early spring. We hire at the end of April. And there's no time for big committees to have some inefficient, slow bureaucratic process to slow it all down. We'd never get a candidate to come to campus. So I'm not sure how to do this, I guess is what I'm saying. But I agree with a lot of the critiques that have been brought today.
So let's actually try to get a little bit more concrete about what you mean by checks and balances. So like we've invoked the existence of other kind of centers of power within the university. So you've got presidents, provosts, trustees are interesting because are they within the university? I mean, certainly they're the governing body of the university, but they also are kind of, they're businessmen, they're political appointees in some cases, right? But so and I guess one question I have is like, where are the points of intervention? So we've talked a little bit about like making choices about what areas of research to hire in, um, making sort of thumbs up or thumbs down decisions when departments have forwarded candidates up the chain for a final approval. But what other kind of points of intervention and who can maybe exert influence at those points of intervention do you guys have in mind? And how does that like work in terms of checks and balances?
I could take one stab at this. I think so. We identified administrators, trustees, faculty. One thing that a school could do, they have to get involved sort of way ahead of any kind of hiring decision. One thing that a school could do, and this could be something that trustees sort of, uh, establish a commission to do, is take a look at the sort of balance of viewpoints within the departments, within the divisions of the school, within the school as a whole, and then establish some sort of action areas and say, for example, across 4 different social science departments, we have a dramatic overrepresentation of critical race theory, for example. And so as a kind of action item, we want to say, any future lines, we would ask that you focus in these particular areas here. So it's a kind of checking and balancing, but you're getting involved in the checking and balancing before there's even anything to balance, before there's a check to balance, right? You're saying we've taken an inventory of the school and we see that there's plenty of this and there's very, very little of this. And so we would sort of propose that future hires in the social sciences, the humanities, whatever, address these areas of deficit. That would be one way to exert that power. And it's not reactive. It's not coming in and saying, oh, nope, you can't hire that person. Oh, sorry, can't hire that person. Yeah, it's setting an agenda for the school.
So kind of like audit. Well, audit's a scary word, especially with tax day right around the corner. But it's sort of like yeah, I mean, let's take a look at the school. Where are the holes? It
Yeah,
could be a kind of collaborative endeavor with faculty and administrators and maybe even some trustees, sort of saying like, where can we broaden, say, the research interests represented on our faculty, and that might have some positive effect with respect to broadening viewpoints. Are there any other kind of like
and let me
proactive
say,
solutions, maybe?
and let me just say that's an extension of things that are already being done. Like, for instance, at my school, there's a committee faculty have to serve on it, and they do review course proposals that are coming in, and they will catch, like, if everyone in a given year, if across 5 departments, everyone's trying to offer a course on Franz Fanon and decolonization, they will catch that and they'll say, wait, we can't have a whole course catalog for the academic year 2024 to 25 that is like a quarter Franz Fanon, So this kind of internal sort of monitoring, auditing is already being done, and it could be, expanded and implemented in other ways, I think.
Yeah, so just one example too, if you've identified there's an issue or there's a problem, say criminology is an example, and all the faculty generally have a structural approach, which is quite common and very popular, but they should say, let's hire a cultural criminologist. It's a different kind of branch of criminology, right? Which is less focused on just structures. That's poverty that's causing crime. It looks much more at culture and agency and subculture and things like that. Say, look, we need to add someone as a balance to the structural approach. So that's the kind of thing. It would, once you've identified a problem, then yes, there should be a hiring committee, the department chairs, whoever would be involved in it, and seeing that, look, we need more balance here.
I do wonder. I mean, I like the idea of setting an agenda, saying we're going to do a cluster hire in this area or whatever. I do like that idea because then you're not getting mired down in really inefficient searches that go nowhere and candidates move on and those sorts of things. I do wonder though, because Boston University, Occidental College, we work in very different institutions. At Shippensburg, we're at the end of the pipeline. So you guys pull your sociologist that you want. I do wonder by the time you get to the end of the pipeline, if there's going to be any diversity left, right? I mean, if we're producing sociologists that are all from one perspective, we might just be left without somebody to hire if we decide to go for a cultural approach or to go for an agentic approach, et cetera. So
I would think all the conservative sociologists are being left to the end of the pipeline. They've all been weeded out by
maybe I've yet to,
the
and maybe they
other
exist.
institutions.
I've yet to meet one in person, but
Yeah, right.
So we've got a sociologist. I believe, Lawrence, you did your PhD at the University of Florida. Is that correct?
Yes,
So
long before mine's signed by Rick Scott. Not much better, but
okay, Rick Scott. All right. Florida, in many ways, has been, I guess, depending on your perspective, a trailblazer or a pioneer in very vigorous external interventions in the operations of their public institutions of higher education. And I'm curious. So it actually seems that so from one perspective, it seems, or one might argue, that the situation at various public institutions in Florida has improved over recent years, and that B, that is because of the vigorous intervention of the governing authorities in Florida to alter the balance and actually put into place people who will check and balance the opinions of faculty at the Florida institutions of public education. So, I mean, so I distinguish two claims here: A, that it's gotten better, and that B, this is because of government intervention. I'd love to hear, what are your reactions to that sort of argument?
I would just say, as somebody who talks about this a lot and gets a lot of pushback from colleagues all around the country, it is very much the case that clawing back 1% of power of authority, 2%, 3% to faculty feels like fascism and gets called that. So, I mean, you may have a point. I mean, it may be the case that even drastic changes from the outside just bring us into a little more balance. They don't even really correct the problem, but they make us less egregious in terms of being, I think I read anthropology is 47-1 or something like that. So maybe all of our concern about external pressure is all for naught. I mean, maybe ultimately they would do it better than we would. I don't really have an answer to that.
I think in cases like Florida, certainly, I mean, I'm a liberal. I get really worried about things like the Stop Woke Act. I take one look at that and I'm like, oh no, 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 no. Like we're just not going there. And part of that pertained to public higher ed was found unconstitutional by a federal judge, right? So people such as myself, certainly people more to the left than I, are going to see that as fascism, as Lawrence said, right? But it might be possible also to just see it as a kind of growing pains and a sort of a democratic process of testing the limits and seeing what you can do. And DeSantis accepted when it got struck down by the court. Maybe this is just part of the rough and tumble of sort of democratic management of public institutions, right? Democratic with a small d. You push, and yeah, maybe as Lawrence said, the end result is going to turn out to be these public institutions in Florida have been improved. I think I want to check back in 10 years and see myself. I'm really curious.
I mean, it's
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's pretty scary to see them going through, and maybe this is exaggerated, I don't know, going through grants or research or classes that mention diversity, right? Throwing it all out. I study diversity, right?
Yeah.
It's I study inequality, right? But I don't study it. I'd like to say I study it from kind of a centrist position and teach it from a centrist position. So that that's scary. Yeah, there may be some good things happening with this. But I tend to look, we need to do long term, beyond years down the line. What kind of procedures, what kind of structures can we set up within universities to make the situation better?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good point to end this webinar on. Is there maybe we need to check back in 10 years and look at what happens in Florida. My own opinion, for what it's worth, and it might not be much, is that it's too early to say whether things are better in the long run. And then, one concern is that this sets up precedents when the pendulum does swing back to the left politically. What if the new regime wants to start intervening in its own particular way? So, you set a precedent in this sort of way. But, I think that what you just said, Michael, resonates with one way of thinking about what Heterodox Academy's purpose is, and that is to sort of elevate the university from within, figure out ways to persuade faculty, persuade others of the value and importance of viewpoint diversity and increasing it among our faculty. So with that, we can conclude. If you guys want to share anything about how people can get in touch with you, or if you've got websites that you want to promote, this is your chance to do a pitch yourselves, pitch your research. Any last words?
Lawrence, did you have anything to say there at the end or not when I spoke or not?
Nothing as smart as what you said. I'll say connorsinstitute.org. We're trying to do a lot of this stuff here. We love the Heterodox Academy. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming. And Jake and I got a book, The Poisoning of the American Mind. You can check it out on Amazon.
George Mason University Press.
Great. Available in all fine bookshops. And Uncle Jeff Bezos will send it to you too if you ask. Michael, you want any last words?
I just say, I like a lot of other academics, I did just start a Substack recently. I give a little background to the article, a little more details on it. So just look, I don't know, I guess you find it by looking under my name, Substack.
Substack.com. All right. Well, gentlemen, and to all of our participants, thank you very much. Give you 2 minutes back to your day, but really enjoyable discussion. And let's check back in 10 years and see where Florida is and see where higher ed is in 10 years as well. So Thank you, gentlemen. Have a good rest of your day.